What would you do if you were publicly humiliated in a crowded airport? Imagine standing at your gate, boarding pass in hand, when suddenly the agent calls security on you. For no clear reason. Hundreds of eyes turn. Whispers spread. Phones start recording. And just like that, you're treated like a suspect instead of a passenger. That's exactly what happened to a black woman at Gate 32 on a flight to Chicago. The agent questioned her first-class seat, then her ID, then quietly called security. But what no one in that terminal knew was that the woman they doubted wasn't just a passenger. She was one of the most powerful aviation safety officials in the country. And when she calmly pulled out her FAA badge, the entire terminal went silent. This isn't just a story about discrimination. It's a story about dignity, grace under pressure, and a moment that left an airport speechless. Stay with me, because what she said next changed everything. Security was already on the way. The words echoed across the crowded terminal like a sudden clap of thunder. Travelers turned their heads. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Phones slowly lowered. Even the rolling sound of suitcase wheels seemed to fade beneath the weight of that announcement. At Gate 32, under the bright fluorescent lights, a tall black woman stood calmly beside the boarding counter, her carry-on resting neatly by her polished heels. Her name was Dr. Maya Reynolds. She wore a simple navy blazer over a white blouse, her natural curls framing a face that carried both intelligence and quiet confidence. Nothing about her looked suspicious. Nothing about her suggested trouble. Yet the gate agent's voice had carried across the entire waiting area. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside. Security has been notified." The words felt sharp, final. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd, like wind through dry leaves. What did she do? Did she argue with someone? She must not have proper documents. Speculation spread faster than truth ever could. Maya took a slow, steady breath. This wasn't her first time feeling eyes weigh her presence. She had flown hundreds of times for work, early mornings, late nights, cross-country conferences. She knew the look, the doubt, the assumption that somehow she didn't belong in spaces like this, especially not in the priority boarding lane. "I showed you my boarding pass," Maya said calmly, her voice even and controlled. "Is there a problem?" The gate agent avoided eye contact, fingers tapping nervously against the keyboard. "There's been a concern." A concern. No explanation. No clarity. Just a vague cloud of suspicion hanging in the air. Behind Maya, a businessman in an expensive suit sighed loudly. A woman with 2 children pulled them slightly closer, as if proximity itself was dangerous. A teenage boy discreetly lifted his phone, pretending to text while clearly recording. Humiliation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it stands quietly while others decide what it must be guilty of. Maya felt the heat of dozens of stares pressing against her back, but her posture never changed. Shoulders straight, chin lifted, calm. Within moments, 2 uniformed security officers began walking toward her, their expressions professional but serious. Their footsteps sounded louder than they should have against the polished airport floor. The crowd parted slightly as they approached, forming an invisible circle around the scene. An ordinary boarding process had now turned into public theater. "Ma'am," one officer said respectfully, "we've received a report of a possible issue with your identification." Maya looked directly at him. Not defensive, not angry, just steady. "A possible issue," she repeated gently. "I'm happy to clarify anything." The second officer glanced at the gate agent, who nodded stiffly, avoiding Maya's gaze. The tension in the terminal thickened. No one spoke now. Even the overhead announcements felt distant. Maya slowly reached for her briefcase. Not rushed, not nervous, deliberate. And whatever she was about to reveal would silence the entire terminal. The flight to Chicago was nearly full. Families with restless children, business travelers glued to their laptops, college students wearing headphones. Everyone waited for their boarding group to be called. The large digital screen above Gate 32 flashed on time, and the soft hum of airport life filled the air. Maya had arrived early, as she always did. She believed being late was a sign of disrespect. In her world, timing wasn't just courtesy. It was responsibility. Her entire career had been built on precision, structure, and discipline. She stood in the priority boarding lane when her group was called, rolling her carry-on forward with quiet confidence. But today, as she handed over her boarding pass, something shifted. The agent's polite, rehearsed smile faded the moment she glanced at the ticket. "Are you seated in first class?" the agent asked, her tone no longer warm, just sharp and assessing. "Yes," Maya replied gently. "C2A. A brief pause. The agent frowned slightly and began typing into the computer again, slower this time. The clicking of the keyboard felt deliberate. "Can I see another form of ID?" she asked. There was nothing unusual about the request, but there was something in the delivery, something heavy with doubt. Maya reached into her purse and handed over her government-issued identification without hesitation. Her movements were calm, practiced. She had nothing to hide. The agent examined it carefully. Too carefully. She flipped it over, held it up to the light, compared the photo to Maya's face more than once. Behind her, the line began to grow. A businessman checked his watch dramatically. A mother balancing a toddler shifted impatiently. "This is ridiculous," someone whispered just loud enough to be heard. Maya felt the weight of those words, even though they weren't directed at her. She understood the unspoken message. "Hurry up. You're delaying us." Still, she remained composed. Years of experience had taught her something powerful. Anger only feeds misunderstanding. Emotion gives critics something to point at. Calmness, however, leaves no ammunition. "I'm just following procedure," the agent said stiffly, though her eyes still carried suspicion. Maya gave a small nod. Of course. She meant it politely, but she also knew procedures didn't usually require this level of scrutiny for other passengers. She had watched several first-class travelers board before her. Quick scan, friendly smile, wave through. No extra questions. No prolonged inspection. No tension. Then came the moment that confirmed her quiet fear. The agent stepped away from the desk and picked up the phone. She turned slightly, lowering her voice, but not enough to hide the words completely. "Yes, I need security at gate 32, she said quietly. Maya's heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake, but something inside her settled. This wasn't procedure. This was prejudice. The people in line noticed the shift instantly. Whispers returned, louder this time. "What's happening? Did she do something?" I knew something felt off. Within minutes, 2 uniformed security officers approached with steady strides. The atmosphere tightened like a drawn string. "Ma'am," one officer said respectfully, "we've been told there may be an issue with your credentials." Maya turned toward him slowly, meeting his eyes with calm certainty. "There is no issue," she said evenly, "but I'm happy to clarify." Her voice carried confidence, not arrogance, not fear, just truth. The surrounding passengers leaned closer, watching as if a live drama were unfolding before them. Some looked curious. Others looked judgmental. A few seemed uncomfortable, phones subtly tilted for better angles. No one knew who she was. No one knew what she carried in her briefcase. No one expected what was about to happen. Maya reached calmly into her leather briefcase. There was no rush in her movement, no trembling hands, no dramatic gestures, just quiet certainty. The murmurs in the terminal softened as people tried to see what she was doing. "I didn't want to escalate this," she said evenly, her voice measured and controlled. "But since security is here, perhaps this will help." She carefully removed a slim protective sleeve from inside the briefcase. For a split second, it looked like any ordinary document holder. Then she slid out a polished identification badge. The silver letters caught the bright terminal lights and reflected them sharply across the counter. Federal Aviation Administration. The emblem was unmistakable. A quiet gasp spread across the waiting area, rippling outward like a wave. Conversations stopped entirely. Even the children who had been fidgeting moments ago fell still, sensing the shift in energy. The first security officer accepted the badge with both hands, his professional composure slipping into visible surprise. His eyes scanned the details once. Then again, his posture changed instantly. "Dr. Reynolds?" he asked, looking up at her with a completely different expression, one of recognition. "Yes," she replied calmly. The second officer leaned slightly closer, reading over his colleague's shoulder. His eyebrows lifted. You're the Regional Aviation Safety Director? He asked, straightening his uniform instinctively. I am. The transformation was immediate. The same officers who had approached cautiously now stood with clear respect. The authority in the situation had quietly shifted, and everyone felt it. Behind them, passengers exchanged stunned glances. That's FAA. Wait, she works for the government. I can't believe this. The gate agent's face drained of color. The confidence she had carried earlier dissolved into visible discomfort. Her hands, which had been so firm on the keyboard before, now rested uncertainly on the counter. Maya wasn't just another passenger trying to board first class. She was one of the officials responsible for evaluating airline compliance, enforcing federal aviation safety regulations, and overseeing operational standards across multiple airports. Her signature carried weight. Her reports shaped policies. Her presence in any airport wasn't ordinary, it was official. In fact, she was traveling to Chicago to lead a federal safety review conference attended by senior airline executives and airport authorities. The first officer gently handed the badge back to her, his tone now fully respectful. Ma'am, we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. The word felt smaller than what had just happened, but Maya let it pass. The entire terminal had fallen into complete silence. No whispers now. No speculation. Just shock. The same people who had questioned her presence minutes earlier now stared, as if seeing her for the first time. Maya carefully slid the badge back into its sleeve and placed it inside her briefcase. Then she turned toward the gate agent. Not with anger, not with humiliation, but with steady, unshakable calm. Is there still a concern about my seat? She asked quietly. The question wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The agent swallowed hard. No, Dr. Reynolds. You're cleared to board. Cleared. As if she had ever not been qualified. As if her ticket, her identification, her presence hadn't been legitimate from the beginning. The word lingered in the air. But Maya wasn't finished. She didn't step forward. She didn't immediately walk past the counter. Instead, she stood there for one more moment. Long enough to make sure everyone understood something far greater than a job title. And what she said next would leave a lesson that no one in that terminal would forget. Instead of storming off, instead of demanding names, badges, or immediate consequences, Maya did something no one expected. She stayed. She stepped slightly closer to the counter, not in confrontation, but in conversation. The terminal was so quiet now that even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. She lowered her voice, yet somehow everyone could still hear her. I understand security is important, she said steadily. I've dedicated my career to it. I believe in protocols. I believe in caution. She paused, letting that sink in. But assumptions based on appearance, she continued gently, damage more than reputations. They damage trust. And in aviation, trust is everything. The words were calm, not sharp, not emotional. But they carried weight, far heavier than anger ever could. The gate agent's hands trembled slightly against the keyboard. The confidence she had shown earlier was completely gone, replaced by realization. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I truly am. And this time, it didn't sound procedural. It sounded human. The security officers nodded respectfully. The first officer spoke again, his tone now filled with admiration. Dr. Reynolds has led some of the most important aviation safety reforms in the past 5 years, he said, almost as if reminding the crowd who stood before them. Her work has improved inspection systems nationwide. A low murmur of surprise passed through the nearby passengers. A businessman sitting a few seats away shook his head in disbelief. That's incredible, he whispered to the woman beside him. The same people who had questioned Maya's presence minutes ago were now looking at her differently. Not because of the badge, but because of how she carried herself. Near the boarding line, a young girl holding her mother's hand stared up at Maya with wide, admiring eyes. The little girl tugged gently at her mother's sleeve. Mom, she whispered softly. She looks like a superhero. Her mother smiled faintly, squeezing her hand. And in that moment, the energy in the terminal shifted completely. The tension dissolved. The judgment faded. What remained was something deeper, reflection. Passengers who had watched silently now understood that what they had witnessed wasn't just an uncomfortable delay. It was a moment that revealed how quickly assumptions can form and how powerful grace can be in response. This wasn't about Seat 2A. It wasn't about first class. It was about dignity. Maya turned slightly toward the officers. "Thank you for responding professionally," she said sincerely. "I know you were doing your job." They nodded again, visibly appreciative of her fairness. Then she faced the gate agent one last time. There was no hostility in her expression, only clarity. "I hope next time," she said gently, "you'll ask questions before making calls." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a lesson, the kind that doesn't shout, but stays with you. The words seemed to hang in the air longer than any boarding announcement, heavier than any apology. Around them, passengers straightened. Some looked down, perhaps replaying their own silent assumptions. Others watched Maya with newfound respect, because true authority isn't loud. It doesn't need to embarrass. It doesn't need revenge. Sometimes the strongest statement is calm truth, spoken at the right moment, and everyone at Gate 32 felt it. Boarding began moments later, but something had changed. The usual rush toward the gate, the subtle competition for overhead bin space, the impatient shuffling, was gone. Instead, passengers instinctively stepped aside as Maya approached the scanner again. No one sighed this time. No one whispered. A path opened for her. A few people offered quiet apologies as she passed. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," one woman murmured softly. Another man gave a small nod of respect. The businessman who had whispered earlier stood from his seat and spoke clearly enough for her to hear. "Ma'am, thank you for handling that with such class." There was sincerity in his voice now, no impatience, no judgment. Maya paused briefly and offered him a gentle smile. "We all have room to learn," she replied. Simple words, but powerful ones. As she walked down the jet bridge, the hum of the terminal behind her felt distant. The metallic tunnel echoed, softly with each step of her heels. For a moment, she allowed herself a quiet breath, not of relief, but of reflection. Inside the aircraft, the story had already begun circulating among airport staff. A gate supervisor spoke quietly to a flight attendant. A few crew members exchanged surprised glances. News travels quickly in places built on coordination. By the time Maya stepped through the aircraft door, a flight attendant greeted her with noticeable warmth. "Good afternoon, Dr. Reynolds," she said with a respectful smile. "It's an honor to have you on board." The tone was different now, not because of status, but because of awareness. Maya nodded graciously. "Thank you." She moved down the aisle and settled into Seat 2A. The same seat that had been questioned minutes earlier now felt like nothing more than what it always was, hers. Outside the plane window, ground crews prepared for departure. Orange-vested workers signaled to one another. Baggage carts moved into position. The aircraft engines hummed softly, building toward takeoff. Inside the cabin, conversations slowly resumed. But the tone was different. Lower. Thoughtful. A few passengers glanced toward first class, not with curiosity, but with quiet admiration, reflection, respect, understanding. The plane pushed back from the gate and began its slow taxi toward the runway. As it lifted into the sky and the city below grew smaller, the tension of the terminal faded completely. Sometimes power isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't shout or demand attention. Sometimes it simply presents truth and allows silence to do the rest. Hours later, cruising high above the clouds, Maya opened her folder and reviewed her notes for the conference in Chicago. Charts, compliance reports, policy updates. Her mission had always been clear: make aviation safer, fairer, better. But today, she had delivered another kind of safety lesson, one not written in federal manuals or regulatory handbooks. A lesson about judgment, about patience, about dignity under pressure. Back at the terminal, the gate agent remained at her post, but she was quieter now, more attentive, more careful. That moment would stay with her far longer than any routine shift. It was the moment when assumptions collapsed, the moment when authority came wrapped not in arrogance, but in calm confidence, the moment when a simple FAA badge silenced an entire terminal. And for everyone who witnessed it, one truth became undeniable: Never underestimate someone based on what you think you see. Because sometimes, the person you doubt is the one who keeps the sky safe for you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity, strength, and grace still matter in this world, then don't forget to support the message. Backhand index pointing right like this video to help more people see stories that inspire change. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the channel for powerful, eye-opening stories that challenge perspectives and touch the heart. Backhand index pointing right, and share this with someone who believes in respect, equality, and standing tall under pressure. Because one story can spark a conversation, and one conversation can change the way we see each other. I'll see you in the next story.